I love this question. What can we do better together than apart? I think Kimberly's asking about connections. How can we connect across all the great work people are doing?
Look, that's something I've been thinking about a lot, because that's a problem that keeps coming back. I feel there's a lot of action in very different areas and different pockets. And the way I really think it could work is to create those like platforms where people across industry, people across roles, subject matter expertise can come together around one challenge or a topic and really work together collectively to solving for that problem, which means that in some way that would the expectation would be that people step away from having a very siloed or narrow-minded view on their sphere of influence. If businesses are quite focused about how do I innovate or take that next level, and get quite worried about competition and how keeping their card close to themselves. I believe that we need to go the other way around, like facilitate collaboration as much as possible and really embrace and invite diversity and collective decision. Now, how that works is going to be a challenge, because we all need some level of governance and help in driving the change. But there's so much happening in different areas. It's a matter of creating that platform to bring it together, because when people get together and everyone at an individual level is inspired and inspiring and have great ideas because they're connecting to them as humans, but then for some reason we sort of lose connection to that as we get to a job, or we have this corporate responsibility or government responsibility, and it sort of disconnects. So it's probably also about addressing that disconnect between being a human and then being a stakeholder or an agent in the economy. Love to hear what the other panelists are thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the economic system is designed to pull us apart, to atomize us, and to have us be individual consumers that don't connect with each other. And so we're constantly having to fight against that to connect with other people. And so, we're treated as consumers. We're bombarded by advertising that plays to our self-interest, and that sends us messages about our extrinsic values instead of our intrinsic values. So the sense that we get satisfaction from how other people look at us rather than how we see ourselves. And so with all that pressure, it's really, really hard to connect. And trying to think, there's a lot of comments in the chat there about, well, how the hell do we get from where we are now to where we want to be? And I think the one thing we can do better together is start to build movements. And for me, that's the only way we're going to get anywhere, because there's so much power sitting with business and corporations. There's so much power sitting with government, and civil society is so splintered and fragmented at the moment that as a sort of balancing power to business and government, it's not working. There's a quote from Hunter Lovins about progressive movements, where she says we're like crabs in a bucket, and every time one of the crabs tries to crawl out of the bucket, the other crabs drag it down. We're too busy fighting with each other about what's the best way forward to actually all get together and realize how much collective power we have. So I think it's only by finding ways to connect that we can start to force politicians to go down the paths that we want to force businesses to shift to being benefit corporations, and through our political power. How we make those connections, that's what one of the things that we're trying to do through the SDG Transformations Forum is connect people up. And when I first started working on narratives, I thought, wow, there doesn't seem to be many people working on this. And then I kept finding more and more and more people that were working on it. And it's not just that they suddenly had started, they were all doing it, but just not connecting to each other. And so there is that coordination task, the groups that are out there and thinking about the bigger picture and about what systems look like and how to build systems. That piece is missing, and that's what we're trying to create. And the really ambitious goal is to develop a platform where people can connect with each other, where funders can find transformative initiatives. We think of it as the Facebook or Amazon of transformation, but we don't want to replicate that kind of model. We want to link up people so that they can work on the transformation that's needed in their local place, and through connecting to lots of other places, learn about how to do it better.
Yeah, and I just might add a really quick comment to that one, which is I think that working together often means strategic inaction. So I think one of the dangers of systems thinking and collaborative approaches to change is that everyone thinks they need to be doing something, and suddenly you have a whole bunch of stuff on the pile which isn't necessarily pointing in the right direction. So often doing nothing is an incredibly valuable contribution to the collective project of achieving a shared objective. And that seems really counterintuitive or really counterproductive. But some of the worst system change efforts that I have seen have involved everyone being like, oh yes, and this is what I am doing, and let's do it together. And that can be productive, but often people's projects, initiatives, desires pull in different directions. And some people need to pause what they're doing in order to amplify the good work of others.
Cool, thank you. Another topic that a few of you have raised is about leadership and ways to influence those in power. Alexia asked specifically about what capabilities need to be embedded, but there's a lot of sort of thoughts and questions about influencing those in power and leadership. Wondering if who would like to go first to discuss that?
I can have a go at how we influence our leaders. And, you know, again, this isn't particularly new or rocket science, but it's in part for us about using language that already offers opportunities to encourage people to be more systemic or more future focused in the work that they do. So a lot of our leaders already believe that they are very good systems thinkers, but they couch that in terms that might not be in the same technical space as people who are more experienced in systems thinking or systems practice or have a depth of knowledge in those areas. But I think where we've seen our biggest wins is when we've said, oh, look at that thing that you're doing that in many ways is actually systems-led design or futures or systems thinking, and let us kind of capture that moment and force our stuff on top of it so that we can help you shape something that actually has a deeper and more enduring impact. I think, you know, classic psychology, if you convince people that the idea is theirs, then they're far more likely to be invested in its success. And so I think, again, having been involved in the systems thinking and particularly the systems thinking and policy conversation for a long time, what tended to happen in that kind of field of discourse a couple of years ago is someone would come in and say, everything that's happening in here is completely wrong, and you need systems thinking to solve all of your problems. And to a lesser extent, like that still happens today. It's an incredibly unhelpful way to build kind of momentum and critical mass, particularly in a leadership cohort, many of whom already believe in what these ideas offer. It's just about capturing their intention and their effort in their own language, and then using that as a way to pivot to particular approaches or tools or methods.
I guess when I'm thinking about leadership, my thoughts don't go to our politicians or our business leaders. My thoughts go to all of you as potential leaders and leaders in your own spaces and spheres. And I mean, I think the politicians are the last ones to lead. They follow where they think the public is at. So genuine leadership needs to come from people doing the best that they can in their different fields. And maybe that, for some people, that's stepping up and being part of a civil society movement, but for some it's just doing what you can within your business context or your NGO context or even your community to try and create these connections that we're talking about between people. And try and have the conversations that might lead people to vote in different politicians that will have a different take on things. So I'm a big believer in distributed leadership, and that leadership is all around us, and that we've all got the potential to step into that role. I realise that that can feel like a bit of a cop-out, because there's so much power in the existing systems. And so it's, again, back to what I was talking about before, about connecting people up so that we can generate more collective power as a movement. And I think part of that is really continuing to try and find our common ground, so that we're speaking telling a similar story and a similar narrative that starts to challenge the power of existing narratives.
Really agree with those viewpoints. The only thing I'd add is definitely around empowerment of individuals. And I feel like I've experienced it myself, where I was feeling really disempowered on a personal level, trying to change things in the way we were living and being more sustainable. And I realized that it did actually have some impact, all the effort that I made. It's still very much work in progress, but I realized like my family, immediate family, is changing things as well, and friends. And then I created this community, and now there's 1,000 of us in that community sharing tips and ideas. So it's really that ground up, grassroots approach will meet the top down. And I think we need strong leadership in some businesses, and you see some of those around, like you see Jacinta in New Zealand, you see Tesla, and people with a strong vision can really change completely the system. And they're one person, and they have this ability to influence. But equally, even if we're not that high levels influential person in our own community and own circle of influence, there's things we can change and act on if we feel empowered that we can, and we believe in ourselves. And I think there's a lot we can do in that space. But also, I lost my train of thought because I was reading some comments. But it's all about this, feeling that you matter. And if we all, we all drop in the ocean, but together we can change things. So definitely, it's maybe those platforms where we can find each other. That's one point I wanted to make. I feel that we sort of, democracy in the way it currently operates is not real democracy anymore. We feel like, we have this right, and we vote, and then we feel like this is up to the politician to enact on what we think is best, but they don't. And it's not because we can vote for a government that things are sorted. We still actually need to be super active in whatever way it can take to then act on these things that we want to see change. And voting and being part of a democracy is one thing, but we can keep doing this on an individual level as well.
On a related question, I just noticed that Mel has asked, how can we enable a wider diversity of people to contribute to the shaping of futures? So how can we enable a wider diversity of people to contribute to the shaping of futures?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something we've struggled with in the SDG Transformations Forum. Is that we talk a lot about what's happening in the global south and social justice and inequity, but when it comes down to it, a lot of the people that have time to engage in the forum are coming from northern contexts and Western context, and are what's called the weird group, the white European and so on. And then and it can be very tokenistic when you say, oh, we've got to bring in Southern voices, or we've got to bring in Indigenous voices, and that's not bringing people in on their own terms. That's saying, oh, we need to include you. I mean, people don't want to be included in that way. They want to be genuinely part of a conversation, part of a dialogue, and perhaps leading that dialogue rather than being brought into it because you haven't met your diversity goals. So I think when it comes down to it, it's about listening. kind of conversations are going on in the global south. They're going on in Indigenous communities, and we're not reaching out to actually just listen to what they're talking about. And this, I had a really fascinating experience of this when I was in Chile for the Transformations 2019 conference, and we were all talking about all this grand stuff about transformation, and meanwhile people hit the streets protesting and burned down the metro stations, and there was a very different conversation going on in Chile at that time to what was going on in our rarefied conference. And the two worlds finally clashed, and we all learned, well, we learned a lot more from that conversation than we did from the conference about what's actually going on for people. And so going into those spaces as a listener rather than saying, hey, I've got this great solution for you, is one way to start, I think.
Does anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I love your thinking, Chris, on that. This is, yeah, it's rather than telling, it's really about listening. I think something else that we might not feel comfortable doing is actually going towards people we would not go towards initially. So, there's the good and the evil, and we have this tendency to categorize people into boxes and feeling, the big petrol organization are sucking the earth up, and really talking from a vantage point where we're in a judgment situation and we believe we know better. But equally, if you build that empathy and listen and go towards other people that are very different to you, there's actually a different narrative and story they can share. And, no one wants to do bad stuff, I believe. Like, we all intrinsically want to do the right thing. Then that right things mean different things for different people, depending on where they are, their personal situation, their upbringing, their culture. So it's having that opportunity to go out there and try to meet people you would not otherwise is really helpful, because then that brings that bridge, and you're not just saying we need to bring them in. It's like you go into them.
Great. It's 8:38. I'll just do one last question. If we have a tipping point now, what is needed to make sure we see change? That's from Josh.
God, if that's the question that came from the notes, Josh, it's the $1 million question. I think from my point of view, one of the things that is definitely front of our mind at the moment, particularly as we start to really embark on a program of how we deliver all of the government's economic stimulus, is recognizing that it's going to have a transformative impact in the lives of both individuals and small business that it affects. And while the immediate impact of those policies and programs and stimulus measures is kind of contained for many of those measures for 6 months, obviously the reality of COVID-19 and our response to it is that it's going to transform people's lives forever. So I think from a systems design perspective, and particularly taking a foresight or a future focused angle to that, it's recognizing that the decisions we make now, regardless of how we really shape them, given the moment we find ourselves in, are likely to have a transformative impact. Being really mindful of that and how we make the changes, whether they're transformative changes or kind of changes around the edges to the systems that we all respectively work in. It's a bit cliche, but I was talking to my grandmother last week, who absolutely despises being in social isolation back in New Zealand, though she loves Jacinda. And she was saying, she's 95, and she was reflecting on the fact that she's lived through kind of 2 transformative moments in world history. So the first being the end of World War II and the Great Depression in New Zealand. And she's reflecting on the fact that despite everything that's happened over the course of her lifetime, she sees the moment that we inhabit right now as one of those other transformative moments. And I think it's being mindful of that, kind of not playing it down, and recognizing that the decisions we make now kind of lead us into that new trajectory. and then kind of using and leveraging the collective brains trust to do something with that has impact.
Yeah, I would just add that right now we've all got a lot of time at home to reflect, and that when we're doing that, we could reflect about what is it about this time, this strange time that we're in, that we really value. So for me, you know, being able to make these connections with lots of people that I wouldn't otherwise connect with is something I'm really valuing about this time. Having some time and space where I don't feel quite as pressured by deadlines and everything, that's helpful. And then what are the things that we're really missing in this time? And most of that is about, I mean, maybe some people answer with, well, I'm missing shopping, but I'm missing the connections that I can make with my friends and family and the time that I spend with them. And so thinking about, you know, what is it that's really important to us? This is a time when we can take some time to reflect, and sharing some of that, and sharing the really positive stories that we're hearing about people helping each other, helping to amplify some of those stories. I think those are some of they feel like small things, but if a lot of people are doing them, they can connect up, and maybe if we're in a tipping point, help to tip us in a better direction.
Yeah, just to close off on that, I think there's two options at the end of this situation. There's one that we've, you know, we might revert back to whatever model people know and feel comfortable with, and feel like we have to rebuild everything the way it was. Or we have that great opportunity to change things. And it's about, I think it's going back to everyone has that role to play on how do we show up through the course of the crisis, and then at the end of it to really demand and act on what we want, because this is such a great opportunity in some way. We've really completely changed around everything we used to do in the way we used to do it overnight, almost like in the course of not even a month worldwide. It's crazy. And it's been obviously under the pressure of an issue and something that we had no choice to do. But that also shows the power that when we're given a constraint, and your climate change could be another one. How do we create that change in a way that we feel that we're happy to, you know, embrace it as well, so we don't live constraining the way we are right now, but like in just learning those skills and this ability to move quickly across the world. So yeah, it's not falling asleep. It's keeping that awake to feel empowered to continue on once that's sort of passed, and keep that sense of urgency that we need to change, otherwise this is going to happen again.
Cool. Well, thank you. It's 8:44, so we're like kind of bang on ending time. I'd like to everyone to put their videos on, do big jazz hands. Jazz hands to all the panelists. Thank you so much. Jazz hands for all of you for coming along and participating. To Sarah as well for all her help in putting this together. We will share some. We'll share some of the resources that were in the chat. I'll send you all an email